Welcome to Season 3 of the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, a place where we explore the past, present, and future of homeopathy from the perspective of a couple of insiders who have been around the homeo block a couple of times.
Homeo block?
Early enrollment is underway at the Academy of Homeopathy Education. AHE is the first and only program in the U.S. to offer a full-time pathway. Enroll for fall 2025 by April 30th and save up to $500 on tuition. Contact admissions today at ahe.online.
All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good
Yo.
good whatever else.
Yo.
Today, in our 6,485th podcast,
At least. We've done at least that many.
we're going to talk to you about a problem, a challenge, and a tension that exists in our field. And I think this particular topic is the reason that homeopathy is not always a calm blue ocean.
Really?
I think this topic is the fundamental reason that you will prescribe pulsatilla and I'll give dulcamara.
Well,
It's the reason that Lippy and Herring went at it like two elks in an elk festival back in 1848.
because they used to have the annual elk festival held here in Philadelphia.
Did they?
No. But you just said that they were behaving like elk. I think it is one of the core principles in homeopathy. And that, dear listeners, is the totality of symptoms.
Right.
But I don't think it's the cause of the argument at all.
Oh, it is. It's completely it's the heart of it.
Disagree. Well, I think in practice,
Well, I
for
know
sure.
you're going to disagree.
But not with Herring and Lippy. I don't think it's the core part of their argument.
No, you think about it. It really is.
I've
totally
thought
is.
about it.
It is.
I've thought about it. I wrote a book about it.
I know you've written a book about it.
I don't think it's about totality.
If I wrote a one-page addendum to your book, I would add something.
It's their argument is about science.
And therefore about the limitations of the totality of symptoms. Yep.
No, because
Totally.
because it there's more on causation. I think there is more of an issue around causation and the reductionistic principles that Herring was leaning into,
Okay,
as
hang on.
opposed to more of a gestalt. Do you say gestalt or gestalt?
Gestalt.
You say gestalt. I do too.
Yeah.
I was just.
Who would say gestalt? That's ridiculous.
Lots of people say there are a lot of ridiculous people around
I'm sorry if I've offended anybody.
behaving like elk.
So, of course, what defines homeopathy is similars. Everyone's in agreement about that. That's the primary driver. That's the primary defining principle.
From the get-go.
And then secondly, around that, of course, we've got the other principles like single remedy, minimum dose, potentized substances, and the totality of symptoms, right?
Well, you put the potentized substance in. That would make 5. Would make 5.
There's actually 8. I know, you say 4.
I think the 4.
I say there's 8.
Yeah, but I think the 4 core tenets, right? And of course, you can nod your head. They don't see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I know.
But the reason is that comes from the IHA.
The what?
The IHA, the International Hahnemannian Association, which is part of what we were going to talk about today. But
don't be distressed, folks, that Denise and I are arguing about the fundamental principles of homeopathy.
It's the basis of our relationship.
It's that I also include an acknowledgement of the vital force, potentized substances as very different, distinct principle, a working principle than the minimum dose.
Yeah, but so you would then consider Hahnemann a part of the vitalist tradition?
Well, he talked about the external manifestation of vital force on every conceivable occasion.
But was he a vitalist?
That's not the topic of the day.
But I'm just saying, if you're going to include it in the...
It is. Well, I am going to include it.
Well, you do you.
Well, which we all know is California.
Whatevs.
Whatever. So,
but the 4 foundational principles, I like keeping it simple, right? One remedy at a time for the largest totality of symptoms that can be perceived, prescribed according to similarity and given in the minimum dose needed to begin a cure.
Right, so you don't mention the substances in that. And the other
Because-
problem I've got with that definition is that what defines homeopathy is third. Now, for me, it's different because what defines homeopathy is absolutely and
It's
utterly
similar. Of course it is.
Yeah. Well, why is it third?
Just because it sounds better to say them in this way.
I disagree.
However,
completely disagree.
again,
Whatever.
whatever. No, but I think part of the emphasis is in the ordering, right? Because I think if we were to order just in terms of what defines homeopathy, similarity is 100% absolutely and unequivocally at the core.
Cool.
Potentization is not. A
No, it's
potentized
secondary.
substance. It's totally secondary.
Yeah.
I mean,
but so are the other principles. Secondary to similars.
everything is secondary to similars.
Yeah.
Well,
But see, and then the sixth and the seventh that you also don't talk about. So I've mentioned two. And then the other one is an acknowledgement of provings as the source of data.
I talk about that all the time, just not in
I
the
know.
four. But the reason for the four,
I know
just
you don't.
giving the four, is
Yeah.
based on right I don't want to launch into a whole long thing, but the reason for those four. I mean, those are the four to me.
Yes.
Those are the foundational premises on which Hahnemann began the journey. Now, obviously, provings were right up there. I mean, if we were going to order them, we would say similarity and provings would have to be the first two. They would have to be the first two,
Yep.
right?
In other words, what defines homeopathy as opposed to Chinese medicine, as opposed to Ayurveda?
Right.
We've got similars, we've
Yep.
got provings.
Yeah, but there's the four that I choose. It's around the practice of homeopathy, and I feel like in teaching students in the very beginning, because you see, I only use those four as the definition until we get to in our program semester 2, when we start to really bleed chronic diseases into it, because at the end of the day, the principles within chronic diseases escalate to the top of the heap once Hahnemann makes that discovery beginning in 1816 or published, 1828.
Yep.
And so, I mean, there's no doubt that provings would be a core foundational tenet. I guess, would you say tenet in this state, situation? Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do think so, and I kind of I really love this conversation. And dear listener, what do you think?
Yeah.
Should we talk about the
Wait,
four?
did you say all 8?
No, I said 8, but there's really only 7.
So I don't disagree with. Well,
See, when I talk about the seven things,
yeah.
I'm talking about that which defines what we do. I think you're using it. You're using it in a slightly different context, like what you would say to a first day student, right?
Well, early student, and part of that came from teaching in programs where these were not the foundational tenets. So, for example, when I put these
Right.
into the order that I did, was because I taught at a school where polypharmacy was the norm. And so if I had to speak, because I was considered the quote-unquote one of the classical teachers, right?
One of the weirdos.
I didn't realize that. I mean, it took me years to sort that out. Anyway, but their polypharmacy was just a given. And so to start by saying, if you want to understand homeopathy according to Hahnemann, then one remedy at a time is a foundational principle. And that would get their attention because it was very different than what they were thinking about. I don't want to put a right wrong about it because I feel like, my you do you, I feel really good about that. I don't want to worry about what other people do unless it harms somebody. And I think that there are practitioners who have managed, and not a lot of them, but I think that there are some people who have managed to wield homeopathic or substances in potency in ways not dictated by Hahnemann, who do get good results because they are able to perceive some way of application. Like they've got their own special sauce. It's not usually translatable. And I find that the second generation of students with that kind of thing, they often struggle a little bit because that's a special sauce thing.
Yeah. So definitions aside, and whether we run with a 4 or a 7-fold classification
so
of
the
that
7
which defines homeopathy, what we are talking about.
Wait. I just want to be clear on your 7 because so provings, I'm absolutely with you. Potentization, to be discussed because that came
Well, the
later.
infinitesimal, what I would say is the infinitesimal dose.
Except that similars precludes because similars, it's
But
just...
show me a homeopath around the world that only uses
that's
mother tinctures.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
But the idea, though, of what makes homeopathy is not the potentized dose because it operates according to similarity.
No, but it is a part of what defines what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eh.
Secondarily.
And what was the other one? I'm missing one.
So the
Cravings, potentization.
So I say similars,
Yeah.
minimum dose, meaning the minimum amount required to get a response.
Same.
Yeah. Totality of symptoms. What's your fourth one? Single did we say single remedy?
See, this is why mine's better. You just always say it the same way. One remedy at a time. For the largest totality of symptoms that can be perceived, prescribed according to the law of similars and given in the minimum dose needed to begin a cure.
So I include the infinitesimal dose, I include an acknowledgement of the vital force, and I include provings. That's 7. That takes us to 7 defining characteristics about this healing discipline over any other discipline. No other disciplines do those. Some do the minimum dose, but not many.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I don't disagree. I don't disagree with the concept.
But you still want the last word.
Who, me?
Yeah.
Never. I have to pour more coffee.
All right, I want some of that too.
Here you go.
Can I have that? Now, we're not talking about 7 or 4. We're talking about 1 today. We're talking about the totality of symptoms part. And what I'm saying is that this is the most troublesome of them all. And the reason I believe that it's the most troublesome is this is what Hahnemann was attempting to do in 1790 or 1810 whenever he started talking about it. And this is his attempt to talk about holistic thinking, the opposite of reductionism, the way in which he's attempting to articulate to physicians of the day that you've got to stop looking at the problem. You've got to expand the view. And he did an adequate job, but I don't think he did a great job. I think I would give Hahnemann 8 out of 10, or even 7 out of 10 in this instance. Because we have fought tooth and nail to this day about what that means. Right?
Yeah, but it's more complicated than that because Hahnemann he evolved his thinking over time. And in doing so, there were people who sort of built upon the foundational concepts and those who built on a secondary concept and people who picked up other parts of it and added it in. And then, of course, we get to Kent and all the things. Okay? And so I think that totality of symptoms has been ultimately most complicated by the introduction of chronic diseases.
Correct.
Oh, for once.
No, hold on. You agree with me.
Yeah. And so this is why I think totality is a challenge. I also think it's really interesting that Hahnemann addresses it from a bunch of different perspectives. And so when we look at it in the Organon, aphorism 6 is the beginning of the discussion around totality. Yeah. And in aphorism 6, can we talk about aphorism 6 just for a minute? So aphorism 6 is often referred to as the unprejudiced observer aphorism. And in the 21st century, I would call it the DEI aphorism, right? This is where we're supposed to be open to everything that we are seeing, and people interpret prejudice as not understanding the complexities of the impact of poverty on care.
That's not what
it doesn't mean that at all.
No.
I know. So I think that is a lesson. The quote unquote unprejudiced observer is a great lesson for us. That is what we need to be as practitioners, as healers. We need to see people for who they are, and we need to understand all the ways in which there are limitations to what is available to people based on their geographic, their racial, their financial situation in life. And that has been, systemic racism has been a part of our medical system, not just in terms of people's, ethnic backgrounds, but also, women are not just small men. I mean, the female body wasn't even considered in its own right in medical, in the development of medical procedures and pharmacological interventions until the late 20th century, right? In some medicine. So I think it's like a whole other conversation.
Yeah, that's not what he meant
Not
when
at
he
all.
writes about prejudice.
That's not what it's about at all.
And unprejudiced.
Exactly. And so I want to acknowledge, so we don't get letters. We recognize this. Just being careful there. But I want to talk about where Hahnemann was coming from, because I think this aphorism, because of that, because six, it's like amazing, right? It's, you just grunted. Is that a grunt of agreement?
No, because I think the money is in seven.
In seven?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't have seven without six.
You can't.
You can't. Because seven has a different intention.
Oh my God.
Seven is about the externalization of disease signs and gets to your vitalism business.
Well, it gets to what we're talking about.
Okay, but six sets it up.
All right.
You got to have six. You can't have six. You can't have seven without six.
All right.
Okay. Now I'm reading from the Wenda edition, and I know people say, and I get it. There
Can
are
I give you a
translations.
factoid?
Why not?
In Baraki's translation,
Yeah.
there are 45 references to totality of symptoms. And in Wenda Brewster O'Reilly, there's 33.
What?
Go figure.
How do I not know this?
Because you don't...
Is it a language change? Oh, no, don't even go down
it's
that
a
road.
translation.
Right, but is it just using the word totality? Is it a language change or a concept change?
There's your next.
That's right. Now
There's
there
your
goes
next.
my weekend.
Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, I'm reading from this, and I love this. I love this book for students because I love the layout. I love the sidebars. I love the glossary and everything. And so when there is an aphorism or a set of aphorisms or concepts where there is a difference that needs to be understood, we definitely take that into account and use other versions. So I want to just acknowledge that. Anywho, in aphorism 6, so coming from the O'Reilly edition, the unprejudiced observer, even the most sharp-witted one, knowing the nullity of supersensible speculations which are not borne out in experience, and here comes the part that's important, perceives nothing in each single case of disease other than the alterations in the condition of the body and soul, disease, signs, befallments, symptoms, which are outwardly discernible through the senses. That is, the unprejudiced observer only perceives the deviations from the former healthy state of the now sick patient. That needs to be screamed from the rooftops, right?
It needs to be nailed to the wall in every homeopath's office.
Next to the homeopathic diet.
Next to the homeopathic diet. I agree.
But that idea is that you are looking at only that which has occurred since the person was last well.
And that's the problem, because Hahnemann was arguably super clear about that.
So clear.
And then what happened afterwards?
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
You know who we're talking about. Anyway, he says, so the unprejudiced observer only perceives the deviations from the former healthy state of the now sick patient, which are, number 1, felt by the patient himself, number 2, perceived by those around him, and number 3, observed by the physician. All these perceptible signs represent the disease in its entire extent. In other words, the totality of the disease, not the whole person being sick and their personality changed. No, it is the deviations from health. So this superseding state is the state of discord. This is the state of dissonance that the resonant medicine rectifies through similarity. Well, the stronger similar. Anywho, and then he says, all these perceptible signs represent the disease in its entire extent. That is, together they form the true and only conceivable gestalt of the disease. Beautiful. So the totality is...
Do you know I'd been practicing homeopathy for, I think, 8 years. I've been in full-time practice 8 years, and I was listening to a mate of mine, Ken, who, and George, if you're listening, greetings, George, in Sydney, but Ken wrote a kick-ass article on that aphorism in a journal back in the day, in the 90s.
Yeah.
And it was the first time that I'd heard somebody say, no, it's not the totality of symptoms. Even though Hahnemann talks about the totality of symptoms, it's the totality of characteristic symptoms of the sick person.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, that was a light bulb.
Oh,
A light bulb
A light bulb. It's really...
went off.
Do you think that it's interchangeable to say the characteristic symptoms of the disease?
And the totality of symptoms? Only if you've been... and that's where Hahnemann's unclear. Because he says it clearly there, and in the next aphorism,
But
of
I
course,
think it's the same.
in aphorism 7.
Yeah.
Well, it is the same, except people have not run with it in the same way. The
Because-
totality of these symptoms is the outwardly reflected image of the inner vessel of the disease.
Yep.
So we can't see the wind. Can you see the wind?
No.
But
And
you can see the rubbish floating down the street and the plastic bags, and you can see the effects of the wind in the trees and the daffodils and the grass and all of the things. We see the effects of it, and that's it. Because we cannot see the disease,
Right.
it's internal and invisible, we have to rely on the externalization of that. And that's why we need to be unprejudiced and kick-ass observers.
This is why I was never good at windsurfing.
Exactly.
I was terrible at it.
I know, because, and the other analogy, not that I've ever done this, but it's brilliant, is hang gliding.
Oh gosh, I'd be the worst.
You'd be ridiculous.
I couldn't even get up to the top.
But of the top of the hill.
Uh-uh.
Right. But I mean, imagine you're flying. You're flying in something that's invisible,
Right.
the field, or at least the wind.
Yeah.
And the only way you know that you've got to go that direction is because your wing wiggles,
Yeah.
which indicates hot air or hotter air, and you fly into it.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
And so we are essentially teaching students that are flying blind a bunch of skills to be able to navigate.
Right.
And that is to look only towards, or at least to talk to the person and have a conversation with the person. But the only things we're really, really, truly writing down are deviations from the former state of health
Yep.
and the characteristic symptoms of the diseased person.
But which are technically the same as the disease.
Well, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why people say homeopathy doesn't treat the disease, it treats the whole person. It's not entirely true.
Well, and it annoys the... I'm not going to say it.
Nope.
It annoys the hell out of me because Marjorie Blackie, the Queen's physician, for crying out loud.
Oh, Marge.
Marge. That is disrespectful.
No.
Because you would
I would bow
You
down.
would bow
Oh, of course I
to
would.
Marjorie.
Yes.
But, she wrote the book, The Patient, Not the Disease. Now, of course, she's not wrong, but it completely ignores that critical point, and also leads itself to this, this awkward and outdated concept of constitutional remedies.
Yeah.
And constitutional,
Wow.
the one remedy for the
Whole person.
for the whole person.
And their whole life.
Forget about it over here.
Forget about it over here.
So, complex. Now, he doesn't... I agree with you. That's super clear. Right?
Yep.
What happens? He dies. Right? And then the kids start fighting.
Well, and that's where the Herring and Lippy thing...
The funeral games.
The funeral... No wonder Melanie thought, let me bury him somewhere in secret.
Well, probably.
No, I don't think that's why, but I do think that they're... But
When I
let's
say funeral games, I'm talking about Ptolemy and all of the generals after Alexander's died at age 33 in...
And I love that you're using the Alexander example.
Where did he die?
Did you say where or when?
It was in Iraq. In modern Iraq. Or Iran. Oh, jeez, there's a hole in my sock.
And it's one I can't darn at this moment. I don't know.
Anyway, yeah, the leader goes and goes unexpectedly. And it wasn't as if Hahnemann was unexpected. But when the leader went, the lack of clarity, those areas of homeopathy where there was a lack of clarity are where the problems began. And immediately, within 5 years, the first real school in North America is founded in 1848 with Herring and And Lippi.
Wait, you're not talking about the Allentown Academy.
No,
you're talking
that
about,
was Williamson and
right.
Jean. Yeah,
but the school. I mean, Herring and Lippi were not founders. They stepped in. I don't know the date exactly.
But I'm not talking about Allentown. I'm talking about...
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But they weren't part of the founding. They stepped in. They were already a few years ahead of time. Herring was like, like the equivalent of a trustee.
Right.
But they came in, I'm not so good with the dates off the top of my head.
Now, where I want to take this is because I know that, and I love the way you describe this, because you do it so well, and you, above anybody else, really understands the way that science and the developments in science affected homeopathy. But it's still a conversation about the totality of symptoms.
100%.
Because so I thought you were resisting that.
No. I think no, but from a particular perspective, because what Herring is doing is deconstructing to the finest reductionistic point, and Lippi is holding on to totality
of
the characteristic symptoms
as the only way that a homeopath should proceed.
Yes.
Right.
However, the big thing that stepped into it was pathology.
Yeah.
And arguably, well, not arguably, and germ theory. Because and this is something, I mean, I will say that there are parts of this that still I find challenging. So let's just problematize this, yeah? So, well, actually, I'll give the context, then we'll problematize it. So for those of you who haven't sort of followed this story, Constantine Herring, he was very much a follower of Hahnemann. He says in the third American edition of the Organon, he writes the introduction and he says, I follow Hahnemann, da-da-da. However, Hahnemann would agree that he's basically putting himself as an empiricist first, a follower of Hahnemann second. In other words, I will only take forward a concept if I know that it works. I mean, fair enough, except he was confused in certain places with the philosophy. And so instead of, and this, I don't want to get too deep into it, but because of the through line between Herring and Paracelsus, he started going down a different route that took him into more isopathy treatment by same. And you add to that Herring's experience with the microscope, for example, right? Yeah. The famous $750 microscope and all this. So he's taking things down and down and down. And Lippi is saying, well, we of course we want the technology. We want to, they were performing, what do you call it? Postmortem, what do you call?
Dissections?
Yeah, dissections. They had pathology labs in the hospital, all of the things. Yeah? Mm-hmm. However, the differential came around the acknowledgement of the philosophy, in particular, totality, right? Now, there are many deviations that we don't really talk about. The hospitals, for example, Hahnemann Hospital here in Philadelphia, that was Herring's, that was the in the Herring lineage, went on until, they only took the sign down 3 summers ago. Right? And they taught an elective in homeopathy until like the 60s. But it was...
Wait just a second, though, because I was just putting this together. Can I ask you about that? Because...
But can I just finish this one?
Yeah, sorry, you go.
Because I want to just sort of looking at the two perspectives, because it was the reason that hospital was able to be so successful was that it took on all of the scientific advances and used homeopathy in a more allopathic or this for that way. Lippi attempted to start his own hospital. Well, started his own hospital,
yeah.
But it didn't take off.
Yeah.
They were running on bake sale money, and that hospital was built on a holistic paradigm. They were feeding people nutritious food. They had fresh air. They had, they were looking at things. They were only using the interventions, the allopathic interventions, as were necessary, right? That was secondary to the homeopathy. That's like if you have to go to the hospital, that's the hospital you want to go to. So this division went really deep, right? And it would be impossible for us to imagine homeopathy. You cannot extract the advent in science from its effects on homeopathy. And so even though this all happened when Hahnemann died, right? So Hahnemann dies in 1843, right? And germ theory is just hitting, which means, and more sort of the medicine moved from just like bedside medicine to laboratory medicine, which means they're now opening people up. They're performing surgeries. They're looking at the innards, which they never really got to do for any extended period of time before. I mean, until you have anesthesia that is reliable, then you can't keep the caverns of the body open. Well, once you're keeping the caverns of the body open, then you have more risk of infection, which then leads to sepsis, which is why antiseptic practices became big in the operating room. This is where Listerism and using carbolic acid in the abdominal cavity, all this business starts to happen. And so you sort of can't move away from the advances in science. Okay, so here's where I want to problematize this though, right? And it's about something that I am really a stickler on in my prescribing and in my teaching, and that's about affinities. And how, and this, I don't know, this is a question we can answer, and I'm probably going to regret even bringing it up, but I think that there is a way in which we have to really get clear about how we marry the true philosophy of these systems, the organs and so forth, and how we understand how the biological and physiological systems work together with Hahnemannian prescribing. Because what I see happening is people then just resort to the endocrine SAR codes, for example. So they resort to these modern interpretations and extrapolations as opposed to the Hahnemannian homeopathy, which is reliant on the medicines from a different perspective. Does that make sense?
Getting there.
Okay.
Yeah, getting there. You said something, and I did go down a cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And I think I'm still down the cul-de-sac.
Okay, let's go. Let's go to your cul-de-sac.
It's Christmas time.
Why not? Oh gosh. Here we go.
There's Christmas lights. Because I'm struck by a couple of folks in homeopathy that have said there are limitations to the totality of symptoms, and Hahnemann's interpretation of that as being the only way that we can know the disease. All right, so that's the direction I'm taking it. You're okay to go there?
It's a valid conversation.
Yeah, it is. And we know that because subclinical symptoms appear on a laboratory chart but don't appear to the accurately observing physician.
Right.
Or the homeopath. Right?
Exactly.
And so I've always wondered about that. Like, you've got to be a really good observing homeopath to see stage 1 something.
Right.
Right? And the people that have alerted me to that were one Eziaga, Francesca Eziaga,
Yep.
and James Conter Burnett.
Yep.
And so both medically qualified, learnt homeopathy after, I believe, I'm not sure about Eziaga. And if we just run with Eziaga, he said something quite brilliant, and it was, you folks throw too many symptoms into your analyses.
I 100% agree.
Yeah. And then, he named it. He says, look, you Kentian homeopaths, you're all ass about face. You maybe look at that stuff, but don't look at it first. You've got a problem in front of you. Let's deal with that.
Yeah.
And so the thing about the totality of symptoms that I think both of them really pointed out was, we have a drama today.
Yes.
Now.
Yep.
And it's a clinical entity. And forget about, when I was 13 years old,
exactly.
That boy bullied me and I got upset about the goldfish dying.
Right. And I loved boiled eggs.
And I love boiled eggs.
Exactly.
Because you've got a tumour the size of a grapefruit.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, because I love, when you teach Eziaga, I always like to listen in a little because I love the idea of how he broke it down. I don't love that there's an order to it. There's an assumption that you do things in a certain order.
It's funny actually because I'm in agreement with you. The nosode at the end never makes sense to me.
No.
Anyway, that's another conversation.
But also that you start. What's the first thing? Is the lesion layer?
And then you deal with the clinical entity, and that's the lesion. Yeah.
Yeah, but somebody doesn't always have that.
Exactly.
Because you could have miasmatic disease as the presenting totality. Someone could present clearly with a psychotic disease that may not have a straight up clinical.
She meant psychotic with an S.
Oh, sorry. Yes, psychotic with an S. Right. So, but I love the idea of it because, don't you think that these, well, not Burnett necessarily, not Burnett, but Isiaga, it's an anti-Kent approach. So much of what we've had to do to rein back in totality is to take away that Kentian approach.
Well, right, a balance that was just way out of balance.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. So, folks, historically, one of the things that went on in the 1880s and 1890s is James Tyler Kent, the American homeopath, started a postgraduate school. And believe it or not, only ever graduated 30 students.
Yeah.
But my God, those 30 students dominated the next generation and the next generation. And to the extent that really 100 years later, well, 150 years later now, we're still talking about, Kentian homeopathy.
Well,
what he
with that
did,
mustache.
Well, it was a scary mustache, wasn't
Scariest.
it? But what he did is he, quite happily reinterpreted the totality of symptoms to mean the totality of symptoms. Now, I've pondered about this, and I've often thought about, there's a reason that he and his followers did that. All right? So, having got clarity that totality of characteristic symptoms is what our job is and what Hahnemann said back in the 1840s, 1810s to the 1840s, then Kent starts to change that. We see the language changing. We start to see in the literature people talking about the totality of the person. And Hahnemann never said that.
Never.
So along comes Kent, and he comes along, and there's two things going on in the world. One, Freud. And the second, the chiropractors and the naturopaths.
Well, and third, because it's at the same time that the sort of psychospiritual, like Madame Blavatsky, the occult fascination in Victorian England, these things are all happening at the same time.
All right, well, let's explore those three things.
And then comes Jung.
The first thing is, but if we start with Freud, Freud is so normalized, or thinking about the drivers of human behavior is so normalized
now
that we don't even think about it now. But in the 1880s, 90s, early years of the 20th century, it's a ginormous deal. And of course, to start thinking about the psychological drivers of human behavior is a smart thing to do. The second thing is, when I said the naturopaths and the chiropractors and the osteopaths in North America, this is something which I've never understood. They started going to jail.
What?
Yeah. So the origins of naturopathy and the origins of chiropractic and osteopathy are entwined with, and the direct reason that in North America today, we're always talking about don't practice medicine without a license.
Right.
Because there is a long tradition of chiropractors getting in trouble with the local state authority and saying, no, I'm practicing chiropractic. And they're saying, well, no, you're not. You're going to do some time. And so as a consequence of the legal threat, the language started to change. Now, look, it's really smart. If you're a homeopath and you have got a sign outside that says, I can treat all of your diseases, right? I'm using two words we don't use today.
Yeah.
And you see that Bruce down the road has just got a knock on the door by the authorities, then you kind of take your sign in and you're going to re-language your business. And it's around this time that we start to see the language in the textbooks. In 1910 textbooks, you'll see people talking about, oh no, let's treat the whole person. Let's talk about the totality of symptoms. I think it was a very pragmatic way of just trying to stay out of trouble and re-language what had traditionally been medicine to, I can't do that, I'm going to get in trouble, therefore I'm going to talk about it like this.
I'm so glad that you're talking about that. It makes total sense. And I hadn't connected it to the time, the Kentian time. And does this also feed into sort of the shifts in around vitalism? Because I think vitalism got wrapped up in the whole person business.
Well, vitalism has been disowned and humiliated and kicked to the curb by the 20th century. It's very, very few traditions. Naturopathy is probably the only one, and homeopathy that would have still acknowledged vital force or the role of simple substance and the invisible interior being relevant. The others are pretty much marginalized.
When you say simple substance, when I hear simple substance, I think that as a Kentian.
I was thinking of what I put in a cocktail.
That's simple sugar.
Oh.
It is Friday.
Simple substance is Kent's language for vital force, yeah. I never talk about that. It's awkward.
I don't think of it as... Okay, I thought of it as more the inner basin of medicines. That's interesting. From Kent. Not vital force. But I can see how... I can now, through sort of my decoder ring in my head is...
So I suppose what we get to then is we've got to, for whatever reason, and who knows, what I've said there is pretty speculative. I think it's, speculative, but on a little base of dirt, not sand. But that's the reason that when we talk and read homeopaths in the 20th century and closer to, say, the 1980s and 90s, we've got a whole world of different language. You read Elizabeth Wright Hubbard and Dorothy Shepherd and Margaret Tyler and Roberts and some of those folks like Pierre Schmidt. They are practicing in a different millennium.
Very different.
And it's a world away from Hahnemann homeopathy.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah. So
and I think it's harder.
It is.
It's much harder.
Well, and that could actually be because of the degrees of toxicity that our modern patients are living in and the complexity of the chronic diseases that happen today. Maybe homeopathy was easier back in 80, 70,
but
60.
I think it's easier for those kind of people that you're talking about that are doing this either directly or adjacent to constitutional prescribing, right? Because I think our constitutions are now more miasmatically bogged down. But true Hahnemannian homeopathy, I don't think is harder. I think adhering to Hahnemann's principles makes it easier.
Totally. Are you kidding? It's like maths. No, it's not. It's like real easy math.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you notice I said math and maths?
Maths. Yeah, that's good. Good. All right. So I think this is a good beginning of a conversation, getting back on the horse here in terms of philosophy. I'd like to continue this next time.
Would you indeed? Can you write it down so we can remember?
I will, because I'm going to put a note in my organon here, because what happens here, and I think this is really important, especially if you're sort of a homeopath who maybe is struggling in practice, or if you're sort of a homeopathy lover and you're thinking, how do I want to get into this? There are a lot of ways that sort of the learning of homeopathy has been sort of put into this DIY space and, a lot of quick and dirty kind of things. But at the end of the day, even though it's a little bit of a heavier lift in the beginning to sort of take on these foundational principles, once you get it, your outcomes are so much better and more consistent because it's the purest interpretation.
It informs you what to do.
Everything.
Yeah. Like, what am I doing? I'm sitting in front of a client. What am I doing? Oh, elicit the totality of characteristic symptoms from when the patient was last healthy. Talk to them and find out what's gone wrong. Right?
Yep.
it drives everything.
Exactly. I've got a clinic tonight that I have to work on my lesson plan for. So we saw a case last night that we will be, going through we have 3 hours of analysis on this case tonight. And I love this because the first thing that we look at in our group discussion about the analysis is what needs to be cured. What is the deviation from the state of health? And from that point, we begin to look at what the totality of symptoms is. And there are lots of variables and variations in how we interpret that, and that's what we'll keep talking about. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
I don't know how to do anything else.
Me neither.
All right. Well, that's a relief.
Hey, thanks for being here, folks. And don't forget...
Do you like Denise's 4 principles or my 7 principles?
They're basically the same, just
They are
with
the
different emphasis. But don't forget also, if you are looking to hang out with us, first week in June, we have 3 days of our on-site, in-person, and also available online, but our retreat here in Philadelphia and then our gala. So excited, honoring the past, present, and future of homeopathy and rolling out the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy. Get your tickets.
Love it. All right, folks.
Have a good one. See you next week.
Ciao.
The Academy of Homeopathy Education provides various pathways through our program depending on your desired outcome. Our acute care homeopathy programs cater to students and medical professionals who aspire to use homeopathy in an acute care setting. We also offer introductory, professional, clinical training, and postgraduate programs. You can learn more at ahe.online.
That's it. That's all there was. Sorry, you can drink some of mine if you want.
Well, how much did you give it?
I have a lot.
Let me paint a picture, folks. We both had 2 empty cups. What I've got is a thimble full, and Denise has a full cup that I'm about to drink from and slurp.
You're not going to like it.
Oh, yuck.
Because I have flavored oat milk in there. Sorry. Anywho. That was a bit dirty trick, I think.
That was sneaky awful.
It was.
And now you're telling me that it's more complicated
I think it's more complicated. And here's why. So actually what I was saying before you began your slurping expedition was Hahnemann changed. He evolved his thinking over time.